Well, I'm the managing shareholder of Greenberg Traurig's Shanghai office, which is a relatively new office, the newest of the firm's offices. I've personally been on the ground in Greater China for 15 years. Of that, 11 years on the ground in Shanghai. I've been working with Greenberg Traurig's US clients for the past 3 years. And what I do, the firm is really both facilitating US business going into China, but also Chinese companies and their investment activities here as well. I'm primarily focused on foreign direct investment in China. And what we do is we help to work with our clients to go from their desire, their overall business strategy and increasingly of selling into the Chinese market and translating that into a sustainable business that's legally compliant, but also where it's defensible if there are legal conflicts there.
I'm a shareholder in the Atlanta office, and throughout the firm we have many attorneys working. Internationally we have 29 offices in the United States, or altogether, including some foreign offices, Shanghai and Amsterdam, and we have 6 strategic alliances. And through the Atlanta office and other offices, we're helping foreign companies come into the United States, and U.S. companies go to China and elsewhere, and solving many of the similar problems in each case.
Well, something that a lot of people speak about in Chinese business culture is this term guanxi, which roughly translates as connections or relationships. Mm-hmm. There is a misconception about China, and that misconception is that there really is no meaningful legal system and everything boils down to your connections with the government. Well, that may have been true to a certain extent 25 years ago, but since then, in the course of China's very miraculous transformation from being a very tightly controlled planned socialist economy to a market which is in some ways probably more capitalistic than the US in certain sectors. In the process of doing that, economic activities are just simply too complex to have the government orchestrating everything, so they have, over time, but especially in the last 10 years, created a fairly comprehensive set of business laws. They've gone from having virtually no law 30 years ago to having really quite a bit. And also they've gone from the point of having very few judges and courts, and the judges that they did have tended to be former government officials or military officers, to having highly trained lawyers who are now judges. And in the course of that, again, it's a mixed picture, but we're seeing a lot of progress, and in some of China's most developed cities like Shanghai and Beijing, we're actually seeing some of our clients do quite well in Chinese court and when they have local legal disputes. You have, I guess you could think of it this way, of 3 different levels of enforcement. One is administrative, and then the next level is civil, in other words, going to the civil courts and bringing civil suits, and then criminal. China's intellectual property laws are in many basic ways similar to US intellectual property laws. In a few areas it's more closer to the European model, other areas closer to the US. And within those laws, as well as the criminal law, for certain violations, there can be jail time and criminal fines. Mm-hmm. The thing to bear in mind, though, is that the on-the-ground sort of first line of enforcement is through the Administration of Industry and Commerce Technical Standards Bureau, and then those are the 2 primary enforcement agencies. And in some cases, there are a lot of issues in China. It's a work in progress. It's still very much an emerging economy at an early stage. And so what one needs to do if you're a business operator there and your products derive their value from intellectual property, you have to be very vigilant. And for the same reason that in the US you need to be active. If somebody is violating your rights, you don't sit around and wait for a US government agency to go and do the enforcement for you. In China, you hire investigators to watch the market, you watch what the competition's doing, and then it's important to have the right resources in place to pull together enough evidence to show that there is a violation. The other key trend in China, the government's done something very interesting in the last couple years. They are actively discouraging polluting industries and low-end, low value-added assembly sorts of manufacturing. And they're very actively encouraging now, mainly through tax incentives, higher value-added, higher technology manufacturing. And so what does that mean? If you are a company that does have primary R&D, primary IP that it owns, it would be in a much stronger position to qualify for the tax incentives. So now what do we have? We've got a situation where the Chinese companies are developing much more, and they have a much greater interest and will continue to have a growing interest in protecting their own IP. How are they going to do it? They're going to go through the Chinese legal system.
And on the broader scale, I guess, what would you say are the 2 or 3 biggest issues facing maybe a U.S. company that's going to do business in China?
Well, I would say, first of all, the single most important thing for any company, be it a large multinational, be it a Fortune 10 company or little family-run business with a few $1 million in revenue, when you're about to get on the plane to head out to China, you don't gate check your business judgment. Make sure you bring that with you. A lot of the problems we see involve misplaced trust, just complete disregard for properly drafting and executing contracts, or if they do sign contracts, they didn't even bother to confirm the authority of the party on the other side. I would say it really is just some very basic principles of business judgment. I would say that anything where you're giving up the sort of accountability and sort of management control that you would expect from any U.S. subsidiary, as soon as you're compromising that really is, I think, a recipe for disaster in the long run there. But then also, in terms of approaching any cross-border arrangement, maybe it's a service contract or a sales contract to a Chinese company, it's important that the clients do receive some solid advice on the U.S. end. There are various legal issues that Robert's an expert in that impact cross-border contracting, as well as the U.S. regulatory side of that. And one reason, frankly, that I joined Greenberg Traurig is just the incredible resources, colleagues like Robert, who are very well versed in cross-border business, who understand the U.S. legal implications. And so that way I can be counseling a client that wants to set up in China, but I know that I have someone I can work with very closely here in the U.S. that can give them some very current and expert U.S. legal advice.
Well, I mean, there's a general increase in cross-border business everywhere, from Georgia particularly, from Atlanta, or really you think of Atlanta as the center of a 7-state region. And we have resources in Atlanta, in commercial services and legal services that probably don't exist to the same extent in any other city in the Southeast. So along with the issues that Peter was talking about, this misplaced confidence, misplaced trust, the assumption that the terms of the agreement that the people think they've arrived at, the parties think they've arrived at, will be enforced. There are a lot of things that are just different when you go cross-border. The express terms might not be respected, and so it's really a collaboration to make sure that you respect. There's particular U.S. law that applies to cross-border transactions, like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, anti-boycott regulations, prohibitions on who you can sell to, who you can deal with, purposes of the transaction, the substance of the transaction. And then beyond that, assuming you have none of those issues, you still have to make sure that your deal will be enforceable in the foreign country. So you need the local advice, as well as the cross-border advice, as well as the U.S. advice.